Welcome to the 63rd reading of my memoir, The Innocence of Guilt. Our wedding day and the challenges of my new job. The day before the wedding found me back in Colchester at my parents' house. November 20th, a Saturday, arrived with rain and a chill in the air, but nothing could dampen my joy. I walked to the public baths in the morning, the first time I'd been there since moving to London. The water was still too hot, and I still didn't have the courage to yell out for cold to be put in. The mixed choir still sang their hearts out, and I joined in, giving it all I had in my finale, never having the need to go there again. On my way home, I stopped off at the florist shop to pick up the 2 stems of red roses I'd ordered for myself. The blustery wind threatened to blow the fragile roses out of my hand on the walk home. 15 minutes before 2 o'clock, and Dad and I the only ones left in the house. I came downstairs in my wedding dress and stood awkwardly with him in the front room. The horrible tension between us permeated the atmosphere, even on the most important day of my life. He didn't say I looked pretty, and I said nothing to him. He'd offered to pay for the drinks at the reception, but I couldn't bring myself to thank him. Embarrassed to show any emotion, we both stood in silence until rescued from our plight by the car arriving to take us to Eld Lane Baptist Church. As soon as we arrived, and the photographer took a quick photo of us, I gingerly took Dad's arm and walked with him towards the church door. Inside, Brian waited for me at the front of the sanctuary, his twin brother Barry beside him as best man. Everything proceeded as planned. Then, just like a few years before, outside Holy Trinity Church, when I stopped to watch a couple newly married and became caught up in a vision of my future wedding, the ceremony took on a dream-like quality. I hardly took it in. We exchanged the traditional wedding vows. Reverend Bailey declared us man and wife. We signed the register and happily came outside to pose for photographs in front of the church door. The rain ceased, and I enjoyed the photo shoot more than any part of the ceremony. Relaxed and confident in my unconventional wedding dress, a basic pattern I redesigned and sewed myself with the help of a nanny I befriended in Knightsbridge who owned a sewing machine. Instead of the traditional veil, I wore a lace bonnet purchased from Harrods. Din bravely attended because I asked him to, but he hadn't been well. He'd reached his 89th birthday only 2 weeks before. Although he didn't smile during any of the photos, I knew he was happy for me. Mum and Dad beamed all over their faces and looked very proud of me. At the Red Lion Hotel for the reception, I wasn't entirely relaxed, not the fault of the ghost purported to haunt the building, I'm sure, as out of the 30 guests present, only 4 were my family. Sadly, my 3 closest friends, Jean, Cheryl, and Christine, my first childhood friend, were unable to attend due to other commitments. Christine, whom I still occasionally wrote letters to, having contacted her prior to leaving for London, spent some time with me shortly before the wedding. The number of Brian's relatives compared to mine subjected me to evaluation, as most of his family didn't know me. Then Mum left the reception to go home and feed her little dog. The old feeling of rejection from her welled up inside me. After the meal and the speeches, I went home and changed into my going-away outfit. Blue dress and jacket, black shoes, and matching leather handbag. Before we left for our honeymoon, I went around the room and talked to all Brian's relatives. Nerve-wracking, but I survived, and we were soon on our way. The 2-hour train ride through Suffolk into Norfolk took us to our destination of the cathedral city of Norwich for our 2-day honeymoon in a hotel. We could have chosen a better time of the year to get married instead of a dreary day in November, with rain turning to wet snow, but the 2 days soon flew by. Because we ran out of money, did manage to pay the bill, we sneaked out of the hotel to avoid the porter who would want to carry our 2 little suitcases and receive a tip we couldn't give him. We walked to the nearest bus stop to catch a bus to the train station and laughed at the way we had come down in our fortunes, arriving in style in a taxi and leaving unceremoniously on a bus. We travelled home to our flat, 9 Yonge Park, 2 rooms on the 4th floor of a terraced house and a bathroom in the attic, no lavatory. We shared the lavatory in the Baineses' bathroom on the ground floor, and many times one of them would either be in the bath or using the loo themselves. Mrs. Baines refused me the use of the back garden to hang out my washing, so I resorted to hanging it upstairs in the attic on a wooden clothes rack with the small window open to help it dry faster, or spend money at the laundrette. We did our best to make the flat into a comfortable place, but it wasn't easy. The landlord reluctantly replaced the rotten linoleum in the kitchen come living room. I scrubbed the grubby upholstered furniture and endured complaints from Mrs. Baines that she could hear me dragging it around while she tried to sleep. She said this to Brian while I was at work, so he suggested I invite her upstairs to see the results of all my activity, but it didn't improve the relations between us any. As well as fighting over the cleaning of the 3 flights of stairs and the use of the lavatory, we also fought over the use of the lavatory paper. For some reason I could never figure out, she didn't like me. Oliver and Kay bought me a reconditioned Singer sewing machine for a wedding present, so I set to work making curtains and towels. Gradually the rooms became presentable and we invited them to visit. I cooked a roast beef dinner and did my best to show my fussy in-laws what a good little housewife I had become. They weren't very impressed with the flat, though, and Brian's mum grumpily remarked that her son hadn't been brought up to live in such a place. They left, leaving me crushed. I knew our flat wasn't fancy, but it was all we could afford. We were happy with it, and it wasn't as if we intended to live there forever. Brian must have been influenced by the condemnation and pressure of his mother's words too, because although perfectly satisfied with the way I handled things before, as soon as she left, he mentioned a few things she suggested I do differently. I suppose he thought she meant well by pointing out these matters, but I felt deeply hurt. It translated into self-consciousness, pottering around doing jobs I pretended Brian's mother could see me. I performed for her, much the way I'd performed as a small child with my toys in the garden for the factory workers in West Stockwell Street. It gave me some sense of fulfillment to imagine the person who appeared to be judging me observed and approved of my every move. I knew she hadn't wanted me to marry her son. I feared that in her eyes I would never be good enough for him. My parents could not be persuaded to come and visit. I especially wanted my dad to see me in my own home. It occurred to me that if he saw me as a responsible married woman, we might be able to close the gap existing between us. The area we lived in was occupied predominantly by black immigrants. I soon met my first taste of racism. No idea before that it worked both ways. In my beige coat with the lamb's wool collar, perfectly at home in Knightsbridge, I stood out as an affluent white woman in Finsbury Park, shoved out of the queue for the dryers in the laundrette, and pushed to the back in the small grocery shop because of the colour of my skin. Brian met similar treatment when he attempted to use the public payphone in the street. My new job proved hectic and challenging. In short, it wore me out. The facility, largely funded by donations, had only 2 paid staff, matron and me. We relied heavily on volunteers in the community. All of the children were severely handicapped and none had ever been in school. No programs existed for such children at that time. They would have been in an institution but for their parents wishing to have them at home. Mixed in with the assortment of cerebral palsy and Down syndrome cases, rather horribly called spastics and mongoloids, were children with a myriad of mental deficiencies under the umbrella of retardation. Some suffered lobotomies to make them more manageable. They ranged in age from 2 years to teenage, and most wore nappies. The dedicated volunteer ladies loved to sit and talk to the children or sing songs to them, but rarely helped me with the constant nappy changing. All day long I carried the children who couldn't walk back and forth to the bathroom. Some fought me, and I developed a method of tying their legs and hands together with cloth strips so they wouldn't kick or punch me. The bigger ones I tied to the radiator so they wouldn't run away. At the end of each day, my back ached so much. Once home, I collapsed on my bed and instantly fell asleep. As the months went by, more and more professionals turned up to volunteer their time by offering hopeful alternative treatments on children who seemingly had nothing to lose. I was struck by the optimism of the parents. The children were born brain damaged, but their parents continually hoped for a breakthrough, some revolutionary treatment, enabling their afflicted children to live normal lives. In my view, most of the cases were hopeless, other than a miracle from a God who appeared to have turned his face at the moment of their birth. Outside of working hours, I sang in the Splinter Group, the traditional jazz band at Imperial College. I enjoyed the practices, but suffered terrible nerves during performances. My one important gig took place at an event called the Ali Pali All-Night Stomp at the Alexandra Palace. I went into the ladies before taking the stage, and my fans, who had heard me sing before at smaller venues, asked if I was singing that night. I disappeared into the lavatory to avoid talking to them. Desperate to get the performance over with, so I could be lost amongst the crowd on the dance floor while the other bands took over. By the latter part of 1966, I left the band. Traditional jazz wasn't my favourite style. It didn't suit my voice, but the real reason was the stress of performing. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to subscribe, like, or comment on this reading, and hopefully you will tune in to the next one. Bye for now.